During a luxurious party, a woman accuses a cleaning lady of theft in front of everyone. The millionaire, under pressure, makes a quick decision and fires her without hearing her defense. But something in her reaction raises a doubt that no one can ignore, and a piece of jewelry reveals a secret that completely changes that story. If this beautiful story of overcoming and love interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you are watching us. Continuing, the ballroom of the Hotel Renaissance, right on Avenida Paulista, was radiant that Friday night. Crystal chandeliers reflected golden light onto tables decorated with white orchid arrangements and champagne flutes that sparkled like small stars. It was the annual celebration of Carvalho Investimentos, an event that gathered entrepreneurs, investors, and business partners of Eduardo Carvalho, one of the most influential men in the São Paulo financial market. For him, that night was not just a party, it was a declaration of power. Every detail had been meticulously planned by his wife, Patricia, an elegant and determined woman who knew exactly how to maintain impeccable appearances. Eduardo circulated among the guests with the confidence of someone who had built an empire from nothing. His perfectly tailored Italian suit matched the calculated smile he distributed generously. Beside him, Patricia wore a navy blue silk dress that had cost a fortune, and her neck displayed an emerald necklace that provoked envious looks wherever she passed. She greeted each person with the right dose of friendliness, mastering the balance between intimacy and distance. That was their world. A world where everything seemed under control, where every gesture had a purpose and every word was weighed before being spoken. Lucas Carvalho, Eduardo's son and Patricia's stepson, observed everything from afar, leaning near the bar. At 28 years old, he had already participated in dozens of events like that one, but he had never been able to fully get used to the artificiality of that environment. A business administration graduate, he worked at his father's company, but he always felt that something was missing in that life of appearances. He picked up a glass of red wine and let his gaze wander across the room, observing the forced smiles, the calculated hugs, and the conversations that promised million-dollar deals. It was then that he saw her. Julia moved discreetly between the tables, collecting empty glasses and used napkins with the silent agility of someone who had learned to be invisible. She was one of the outsourced employees hired for that night, dressed in the simple and discreet uniform that completely differentiated her from that world of luxury around her. Her brown hair was tied in a low bun, and she kept her gaze always directed toward the floor, avoiding eye contact with any guest. To most people there, she simply did not exist. She was part of the scenery, like the flowers and the chandeliers. Lucas watched her for a few seconds, noticing the delicacy with which she worked, the careful way she organized every detail. There was something serene about her, a silent dignity that contrasted with all that ostentation. He thought about starting a conversation but gave up. That was not the place or the time. Patricia, for her part, moved through the ballroom like a queen inspecting her domains. She was talking to the wife of one of the main investors when something caught her attention, her eyes fixed on Julia, who was passing nearby carrying a tray. At first, it was just a casual look, the kind one casts upon those working in the background, but then Patricia saw it, and what she saw paralyzed her completely. On Julia's neck, discreet but unmistakable, hung a necklace. It wasn't a flashy piece, but it had a particular glow that Patricia knew very well. It was an antique gold pendant with a small sapphire in the center, surrounded by delicate filigree that formed a unique design. That necklace was not common, it was extremely rare, and Patricia knew exactly where it came from. Her heart raced, her breath got caught. The words of the friend beside her became a distant and incomprehensible noise. Patricia felt a wave of heat rise through her face, mixing incredulity and fury. That necklace had belonged to the Carvalho family for generations. It was an inheritance that Eduardo kept safe, a piece of inestimable value not just for the gold and the stone, but for the history it carried. And now, inexplicably, it was on the neck of a cleaning lady. Without thinking twice, Patricia crossed the room with firm steps. Her high heels clicked on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo louder than the ambient music. She didn't care about the curious looks that began to follow her. She didn't care about the fact that she was in the middle of an important celebration. She could only think about that necklace and what it meant. Julia was near one of the side tables when she felt the presence of someone approaching quickly. Before she could react, she heard Patricia's cutting voice. "Where did you get that?" Julia turned, startled. Patricia was standing right in front of her, her face rigid, her eyes fixed on the necklace. The young woman instinctively brought her hand to her neck in a protective gesture. "I don't understand, ma'am. This necklace," Patricia pointed with her finger, her voice rising in volume. "Where did you steal this necklace from?" The word stole dropped like a bomb in the ballroom. The conversations around began to fall silent one by one, like dominoes falling in sequence. Faces turned in their direction. Whispers began to spread. Julia felt the blood freeze in her veins. She looked around and saw dozens of eyes on her, judging, condemning, even before hearing any explanation. "I didn't steal anything," she replied, her voice trembling but firm. "This necklace is mine. It has always been." Patricia gave a bitter laugh loaded with contempt. "It has always been. Do you think I'm an idiot? This necklace belongs to my family. It is a rare, unique piece, and now it's here on the neck of a cleaning staff member." The humiliation was public and devastating. Julia felt tears burn her eyes, but she fought not to let them fall. She squeezed the necklace between her fingers, as if that gesture could protect her from all that verbal violence. Eduardo, who had noticed the commotion, approached quickly, his face showing concern and embarrassment. Lucas also moved toward them, feeling that something very wrong was happening. "What is going on here?" Eduardo asked, trying to keep his voice low but firm enough to impose authority. Patricia turned to him, her eyes shining with indignation. "Look at what this woman is wearing," she pointed again to the necklace. "It's your family's necklace, Eduardo, the necklace that belonged to your mother, and it's here, stolen, on her neck." Eduardo felt a tightness in his chest. His eyes went straight to Julia's neck, and for a brief second he seemed to falter. There was something about that necklace, about that startled face, about those eyes staring at him with a mix of fear and dignity that awakened a strange sensation in him. Something he couldn't name, a distant memory, an echo of something he preferred to have forgotten. But he was surrounded. Dozens of important guests were watching the scene. His reputation, his authority, everything was at stake. He couldn't show weakness. He couldn't hesitate. "You are fired," he said, his voice coming out colder than he intended. "I want you to leave this ballroom immediately." Julia felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. "But sir, I swear this necklace has been mine since I was a child. My mother, the woman who raised me, she gave this to me. I never stole anything from anyone." Eduardo looked away, unable to sustain those pleading eyes. "I don't want to hear explanations. You are leaving now before I call security." Lucas took a step forward instinctively. "Father, wait, maybe we should—" Eduardo shot a hard look at his son, cutting off any attempt at interference. "Lucas, don't get involved in this." The young man backed off, but his eyes remained fixed on Julia. There was something deeply wrong with that situation. The way the woman held the necklace, the genuine expression of confusion and pain on her face, none of it seemed to match someone who had committed a crime. She looked, in fact, like someone who was being wronged. 2 security guards appeared beside Julia, awaiting orders. She looked one last time at Eduardo, then at Patricia, and finally at Lucas. There were so many questions in that gaze, so much lack of understanding, but no one was willing to listen. With the dignity she still had left, Julia turned and walked toward the exit, accompanied by the guards. The entire ballroom watched in silence. When the door closed behind her, conversations gradually resumed, now loaded with gossip and speculation. Eduardo returned to circulating among the guests, forcing a smile, trying to minimize the scandal. Patricia remained tense, but satisfied for having defended what she considered just. Lucas, however, couldn't take his eyes off the door through which Julia had exited. Something about that scene bothered him deeply. It wasn't just the evident injustice. It was something more. A feeling that that necklace, that woman, and that accusation were part of something much larger and darker than it appeared. He took his cell phone and discreetly left the ballroom. He needed air. He needed to think. And above all, he needed to understand why his father, a man always so controlled, had reacted that way. Why he had fired the woman so quickly, without even giving her a chance to explain herself. Why in Eduardo's eyes, Lucas had seen something he never expected to see. Fear. The night followed its course, but for Lucas, Julia, and Eduardo, that celebration had marked the beginning of something none of them were prepared to face. A truth that was about to come to light, destroying everything they thought they knew about their own lives. Julia walked through the streets of São Paulo with teary eyes and a broken heart. The night was cold, and she pulled her thin coat against her body, feeling the wind cut through her skin. Every step she took moved her further away from that luxury hotel, but the humiliation remained stuck to her like a second skin. Patricia's words echoed in her mind, cruel and devastating. Thief. Criminal. The accusations weighed like stones on her shoulders. She brought her hand to the necklace that still hung on her neck. That small gold pendant with the sapphire in the center was everything concrete she possessed about her past. She had no baby photos. She had no old certificates. She had no clear memories of her first years of life. She had only that necklace and the vague words of Donna Maria, the woman who had raised her, always saying that it was a family gift, something precious she should keep forever. Julia had never questioned it. She had never suspected. She had simply accepted it the way children accept the truths offered to them. Now, walking alone through the streets lit by lampposts and car headlights, she felt that something didn't make sense. If that necklace really was stolen, as that woman claimed, how would it have ended up in her hands as a child? Donna Maria was not a criminal. She was a simple, hard-working lady who had spent her life sewing clothes for neighbors and caring for Julia with all the love she had. Julia arrived at the small apartment where she lived, in the Ipiranga neighborhood, and locked the door behind her. The silence of the empty house swallowed her. Donna Maria had passed away 3 years ago, and since then, Julia lived alone, working different jobs to pay the bills. That vacancy at the cleaning company that serviced events was one of her sources of income. Now, she was unemployed again, and worse, she carried the mark of a public accusation of theft. She sat on the worn sofa and finally let the tears fall. She cried for the injustice. She cried for the shame. She cried for the loneliness. And she also cried for something she couldn't name, a deep feeling that her entire life was a poorly told lie, full of holes that no one ever bothered to fill. Meanwhile, at the Hotel Renaissance, the party continued, but Lucas couldn't concentrate on anything else. He had returned to the ballroom after going out to breathe, but his mind was completely focused on that terrible moment. The way Julia had been treated bothered him deeply. It wasn't just the injustice that disturbed him, it was his father's reaction. Eduardo Carvalho was a calculating, rational man who always measured every decision. But that night, he had acted on impulse, firing the woman without even hearing her version of the facts. Why? Lucas observed his father from a distance. Eduardo was talking to a group of investors, but there was a stiffness in his shoulders, a tension in his jaw that revealed discomfort. Patricia, beside him, seemed satisfied, as if she had fulfilled an important duty. But Eduardo did not seem at ease. He seemed, in fact, worried. When the party finally ended, around midnight, Lucas waited until the last guests had left. He found his father in the hallway, putting some documents in his briefcase. "Father, we need to talk." Eduardo didn't even look at him. "Not now, Lucas, I'm tired. It's about that woman, the one you fired today." Eduardo finally raised his eyes, and there was a flash of irritation in them. Subject closed. She was wearing something that wasn't hers, period. "But did you hear what she said?" Lucas insisted. "She swore the necklace was hers since she was a child. Don't you find it strange?" "What's strange is a cleaning staff member wearing a jewel that's worth more than she would earn in years of work," Eduardo retorted, his voice hard. Lucas took a step forward, staring his father in the eyes. "So you always taught me to hear both sides before making a decision. Why was today different?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Eduardo looked away, and for a brief instant Lucas saw something that scared him. It wasn't anger, it was fear. His father, the man who had built an empire and faced the most difficult situations without trembling, was afraid. Lucas, this is none of your business, Eduardo said, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. Let it go, forget this story. And he walked away, leaving his son alone in the hallway with more questions than answers. In the following days, Lucas couldn't get that scene out of his head. He went back to work at the company, fulfilled his duties, participated in meetings, signed documents, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't forget Julia's face, the pain in those eyes, the way she held the necklace as if she were protecting her own identity. Driven by a restlessness that wouldn't leave him in peace, Lucas decided to look for her. It wasn't hard to find out where she lived. The cleaning company had the registration data of all employees, and Lucas, as a director, had access to that information. He knew he was crossing a line, but something inside him said it was necessary. On a Tuesday afternoon, he parked his car in front of the simple building where Julia lived. He went up the stairs to the third floor and knocked on the door of apartment 312. He heard footsteps on the other side, and then the door opened partially, held by a security chain. Julia's eyes recognized him immediately, and they widened in surprise and fear. "What do you want here, sir?" "Julia, please, I just want to talk. I didn't come to cause harm. I came because I think you deserve to be heard." She hesitated. She had every reason not to trust him. After all, he was the son of the man who had publicly humiliated her and fired her without mercy. But there was something in Lucas's voice, a sincerity she didn't expect to find. Slowly, she removed the chain and opened the door. Lucas entered the small but clean and organized apartment. There were flowers in an improvised vase, old photos on the walls, and a shelf full of books. Julia watched him with suspicion, her arms crossed defensively over her chest. "I didn't steal that necklace," she said before he could say anything. "I know no one believes me, but it's the truth." "I believe you," Lucas said, and the words came out with a conviction that surprised him. Julia blinked, incredulous. "Why?" "Because I saw your face that night. I saw how you reacted, and I also saw how my father reacted. He was afraid, Julia, and that makes no sense unless there is something much bigger behind this story." Julia sat down slowly on the sofa, her legs seemingly losing their strength. "I don't understand any of this. This necklace has been mine as long as I can remember. The woman who raised me, Donna Maria, gave it to me when I was very small. She said it was a family inheritance, but she never went into details. I never questioned it, because trusting her was all I had." "And your biological parents?" Lucas asked, sitting in the chair across from her. Julia shook her head, her eyes becoming distant. "I don't know. Donna Maria was always vague about that. She said she took me in when I was a baby, that my mother couldn't stay with me, that it was better if I didn't ask questions. I grew up believing I had been abandoned, and the necklace was the only thing that linked me to any past. I kept it like a treasure, because it was all I had." Lucas felt a tightness in his chest. There was something deeply wrong with that story. A child taken in by a lady without many details, a valuable necklace appearing without explanation, and now his father's exaggerated reaction to that object. "Do you know where your adoptive mother got this necklace?" he asked. "No, she never told me. She only said it was important, that I should always keep it with me." Lucas remained silent for a moment, thinking. There was a story there, buried under layers of silence and half-truths, and he was determined to find out what it was. "Julia, I want to help you. I want to discover the truth about this necklace and about what really happened. But for that, I'm going to need to look into some things in my family. Old documents, records, stories that perhaps were hidden. Do you trust me to do that?" Julia stared at him for a long moment. There were enormous risks in trusting the son of the man who had humiliated her, but there was also in those sincere eyes a hope she hadn't felt in a long time. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Lucas thought before answering. He could say it was for justice. He could say it was out of curiosity, but the truth was deeper than that. "Because something in this story doesn't add up, and because I think you deserve to know who you really are." Julia felt tears return to her eyes, but this time they were not tears of pain. They were tears of hope. For the first time in her life, someone was willing to hear her version, to believe in her, to fight by her side. She reached out her hand and Lucas shook it. "Then let's find out together," she said. And there, in that simple apartment, began a journey that would change both their lives forever. A journey in search of the truth, which would lead them to unearth secrets that had been hidden for decades, secrets that would involve not only that necklace, but the entire structure of the Carvalho family. Secrets that, once revealed, would destroy everything Eduardo had built upon lies and silence. Lucas left Julia's apartment that afternoon with a determination he hadn't felt in years. He knew he was about to challenge his father, to face painful truths, and to touch wounds that perhaps had never been healed. But something inside him said it was necessary, not just for Julia but for himself, because throughout his life he had always felt there was something wrong in his family's history, something no one talked about, something everyone seemed to have agreed to forget. Now he had the chance to find out what, and he wasn't going to waste it. Lucas spent the next few days immersed in a silent investigation that consumed every free moment he had. During the day, he fulfilled his obligations at Carvalho Investimentos, participating in meetings, analyzing financial reports, and making decisions that moved millions. But his mind was elsewhere, focused on old documents, forgotten records, and clues that could clarify the mystery of that necklace. He started with the most obvious place, his father's private office at the company. It was an environment that breathed power, with mahogany shelves filled with books on economics and management, expensive paintings on the walls, and an imposing desk from which Eduardo commanded his empire. Lucas knew that stored there were not only corporate documents, but also personal family papers, old contracts, and files that Eduardo kept under lock and key. On a Thursday night, when everyone had already left the building, Lucas returned to his father's office. He used his access key and locked the door behind him. He turned on only the lamp over the desk, creating an island of light in the dark room. He felt his heart accelerate. He was invading his own father's privacy, searching for secrets that perhaps should never be revealed. But the image of Julia being publicly humiliated, the pain in her eyes, the firmness with which she had defended the truth, all of it pushed him forward. He started with the drawers. Most contained recent corporate documents, ongoing contracts, investment proposals, nothing that seemed relevant. It was when he opened the bottom right drawer that he found something different. It was locked. Lucas tested the master key he had for the office, but it didn't work. It was a different, older lock. He searched the desk for the key and eventually found it taped to the bottom of one of the upper drawers, an amateur hiding place which revealed that Eduardo didn't expect anyone to look there. With trembling hands, Lucas unlocked the drawer and opened it. Inside were old folders, some decades old, judging by the yellowed color of the paper and the smell of mold. He removed them carefully and began to examine them. There were contracts from when the company was just starting, agreements with the first investors, documents from old properties. And then, in the middle of all that, he found a different folder. It had no external identification, just an elastic band holding the papers. Lucas opened it, and his heart raced. The documents inside were not corporate, they were personal, very personal. There were copies of certificates, old medical reports, handwritten letters, and in the middle of it all, a typed note on the letterhead of a private hospital in São Paulo. The date was from 28 years ago. The report was brief but devastating in its subtext. It spoke about the care of a female child, approximately 2 years old, who had been admitted to the hospital under unspecified circumstances. The text was cold and technical, avoiding details, but mentioned that the minor had been subsequently referred to third-party care after evaluation. There were no names, there were no legible signatures, just codes and stamps that said nothing to someone who didn't know what to look for. But what caught Lucas's attention was a handwritten note in the margin of the paper, made in pencil and almost erased by time. It said simply, "Case resolved according to agreement. Maintain secrecy." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. What did that mean? What case? What agreement? And why did his father keep that document with such care, hidden in a locked drawer? He took photos of everything with his phone, put the papers back exactly as they were, and locked the drawer again. He left the office with the feeling that he had just opened a door to something much larger and darker than he had imagined. In the days that followed, Lucas began investigating in other ways. He looked for old family employees, people who had worked at the Carvalho house when he was a child. Many were no longer alive. Others had moved away and lost contact. But he managed to locate Dona Teresa, a 70-year-old lady who had been the family's housekeeper for more than 2 decades. They met at a cafe in the Brooklyn neighborhood. Donna Teresa arrived by bus, wearing a simple coat and a worn purse. Lucas hugged her affectionately, remembering how kind she had been to him during his childhood. "How are you, Donna Teresa? It's been so long." "I'm fine, Lucas, getting old but fine. I was surprised when you called me. I thought the family had forgotten about me." "I would never forget. You were part of my upbringing." They ordered coffee and talked about pleasantries for a few minutes. Then Lucas decided to get straight to the point. "Donna Teresa, I need your help. I need you to tell me about something that happened a long time ago when I was a child, maybe even before I was born." The lady frowned, suspicious. "About what, my son?" "About a child, a girl, who might have passed through our family about 28 years ago." Donna Teresa's face went pale. She looked away and nervously stirred her coffee cup in front of her. "Lucas, those are deep waters. Waters that your father never wanted to be stirred. Please," Lucas insisted, taking her hand. "I need to know. A woman is suffering because of something that might be linked to my family's past. She deserves to know the truth." Donna Teresa took a deep breath. Her eyes filled with tears. "I was still young when that happened. I had worked at the house for only a few years. Your father was starting out in business, married to your biological mother, Clarice. Those were difficult times. He was under a lot of pressure. He needed money, support, connections. And he ended up getting involved with complicated people." "What kind of people?" "Powerful businessmen. People with a lot of money and few scruples. Your father accepted their help when he was desperate. But help always comes with a price, Lucas. And the price they charged him was high." Lucas felt his stomach turn. "What happened?" Donna Teresa wiped her tears with a paper napkin. "I don't know everything. No one did. But there was a moment when everything changed in the house. Your mother, Clarice, was very shaken. She cried alone in the room. Your father became closed off, nervous, always on the phone with conversations that sounded like threats. And then suddenly everything went silent, as if a problem had been solved." "And the child, the girl?" Donna Teresa shook her head. "There were rumors among the employees, nothing concrete. But we heard things. They said someone from the family had been sent away, that it had been better that way, that it was to protect everyone. But I never saw any child. I only know that shortly after, your mother, Clarice, got worse. She became depressed, fragile. Years later she passed away and everyone said it was heart complications, but I always thought it was a broken heart." Lucas felt tears burn his eyes. He had never known his biological mother. Clarice had died when he was only 3 years old. Eduardo had married Patricia years later. But hearing that, knowing that his mother had suffered so much, that there were such deep secrets involving his family, was devastating. "Donna Teresa, do you think this child might be alive?" The lady stared at him with deep, sad eyes. "I don't know, my son, but if she is, she has the right to know who she is." Lucas returned home that night with a heavy heart. He called Julia and arranged a meeting. He needed to tell her everything he had discovered. They met in a park near her apartment late in the afternoon. They walked among the trees while Lucas related every detail. Julia listened in silence, absorbing every word, every revelation. "So you think I could be that child?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I'm not sure, but the dates match. You are 28 years old. Donna Maria took you in when you were very small. And this necklace, Julia, this necklace might be the proof that you always belonged to my family." Julia stopped walking and brought her hands to her face. It was too much to process. The possibility that her entire life had been built on a lie, that she might have a family she never knew existed, that everything she knew about herself was false. "Lucas, what if it's true? What if I really am? What does that mean?" "It means you were taken from where you should have been. It means someone decided your fate without giving you a choice. And it means my father knows all about this and chose to hide it." Julia felt anger grow inside her. Anger at being deceived. Anger at having grown up alone without knowing who she really was. Anger at Donna Maria, as much as she loved her, for having kept this secret until death. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We keep investigating. We need concrete proof. We need to find documents that link you to my family definitively, and I know where to look." "Where?" "In the old law firm my father used in the early years of his career. They must have records, contracts, documents that were archived. If there was any official agreement, any guardianship term, anything, it will be there. And if your father finds out you are investigating—" Lucas looked into her eyes with determination. "I don't care. The truth is more important than protecting his reputation. You deserve to know who you are, Julia, and I'm going to help you find out, no matter what happens." Julia felt something move inside her. It wasn't just gratitude, it was something deeper. Lucas was risking everything for her. He was challenging his own father, stirring dangerous secrets, putting his family relationship at risk, and all for a woman he barely knew. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing in me." Lucas smiled. "I will always believe in you." They stood there in the middle of the park, as the sun set, tinting the sky orange and pink. Two strangers who, by a twist of fate, were about to discover that their lives were intertwined in ways neither of them could have imagined. Meanwhile, a few kilometers away, Eduardo Carvalho was sitting in his private office at home, looking at an old photograph he kept in his most secret drawer. It was a photo of a small girl with large eyes and brown hair. In her arms, a gold necklace with a blue sapphire. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of decades of lies on his shoulders. He knew the past was coming back. He could feel it. And he also knew that when the truth finally came to light, there would be no escaping the consequences. But what he didn't know was that his own son would be responsible for bringing that truth to light, and that when everything was revealed, the Carvalho family would never be the same again. Julia couldn't sleep. Every night was a torment of thoughts that intertwined, forming possibilities that scared and fascinated her at the same time. The idea that she could have a family, that she wasn't just an abandoned and forgotten girl, stirred something deep inside her. But along with hope came fear. Fear of discovering painful truths. Fear of facing people who had rejected her. Fear that in the end, the answer would be worse than the doubt. On a Saturday morning, decided to do something productive with all that anxiety, Julia began to review the few belongings left from Donna Maria. Since the death of the woman who had raised her, she had kept everything in boxes stacked in the small bedroom closet. Old clothes, recipe books, sewing supplies, faded photographs. It was all that remained of a simple and dedicated life. While sorting the objects, Julia felt something strange at the bottom of one of the boxes. It was a brown envelope, old and yellowed, hidden under a pile of embroidered dish towels. She pulled it out carefully and saw that it was sealed with old adhesive tape, already dried out by time. On the envelope, handwritten with a trembling hand, was her name. For Julia. Her heart raced. That had been there the whole time, waiting to be found. Why had Donna Maria hidden it? Why hadn't she delivered it in life? With trembling hands, Julia broke the seal and removed the sheets of paper from inside. They were 3 handwritten pages, the handwriting of the woman who had raised her unmistakable, full of characteristic curves and slants. Julia sat on the edge of the bed and began to read, and with every line her world crumbled and rebuilt itself at the same time. My dear Julia, if you are reading this, it is because I am no longer here to tell you in person, and perhaps it is better this way. I was always too much of a coward to look into your eyes and tell the truth. Forgive me for that. You were not born of me, my daughter. You always knew that. But what I never told you is how you ended up in my arms. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a common adoption. It was something much more complicated and painful. I was 45 years old when I found you. I was alone in the world, without family, without children. I worked as a seamstress to survive and dreamed every day of having someone to call my own. That was when a woman sought me out. She was elegant, well-dressed, but her eyes were full of despair. She said she needed help with a child, a 2-year-old girl who was in a delicate situation. I didn't ask much. Perhaps I should have. But when I saw you, so small, so scared, something in me awakened. You were beautiful, Julia. Brown hair, big eyes, and on your neck a gold necklace that the woman said belonged to you. She asked me to take care of you for a while until things calmed down. She said it was better for you to stay away for now, that there were dangerous people involved, and that you would be safer with me than anywhere else. I accepted, and in the first months I waited for her to return, but weeks became months, months became years, and no one came to get you. I tried to look for information, tried to understand what was happening, but I was threatened. Men appeared at my door, said it would be better if I forgot everything, that I should raise you as if you were my daughter and ask no questions. They said that if I tried to return you or look for answers, you would be in danger. I was terrified, Julia, and I chose to protect you the only way I knew how, by keeping you hidden, raising you as mine, erasing any trace of your past. But the necklace, I could never take it off you. You cried so much when I tried, as if you knew that was all that remained of your true origin, so I let it be, and over time, I created a story. I said it was a family inheritance, something I was keeping for you. I lied, my daughter, I lied because I was afraid of losing you, afraid that if the truth came to light, they would take me away from you. I know I did wrong. I know I stole from you the right to know your true story, but know that every day by your side was the greatest gift of my life. You gave me purpose, you gave me love, you gave me a reason to live. And even knowing that one day I would have to face the truth, I do not regret having been your mother, even if only in heart. If you are reading this, perhaps you already know more than I could tell you, but there is one last thing I need to say. The woman who brought you to me left an address, a place where, according to her, I could find answers if something went wrong. I never had the courage to go there, but you can and you should. It is on the last page of this letter. Forgive me, my daughter, for loving you too much and protecting you too little, for giving you a life but stealing your story. You deserved more. You deserve the truth, and I hope that, wherever I am now, you can forgive me. With all the love a mother of heart can give, Donna Maria. Julia finished reading with her face soaked in tears. She felt anger, sadness, gratitude, and pain all at once. Donna Maria had loved her. That was undeniable, but she had also deceived her. She had kept her in a lie throughout her entire life, and now, too late, she let the truth come to light. She turned to the last page and saw the address written in careful handwriting. It was a street in the Jardins neighborhood, a noble region of São Paulo. There were no more details, just the number of a building. Julia took her cell phone and called Lucas. He answered on the second ring. I found a letter. You need to come here now. An hour later, Lucas was sitting beside her on the sofa, reading the pages with attention. When he finished, he remained silent for a long moment, processing everything. Julia, this confirms everything. You were hidden on purpose, protected, but also kept away from your true family. But why? Julia asked, her voice broken. Why would someone do this to a child? Lucas looked at the address on the last page. Maybe the answer is here. Shall we go together? Julia hesitated. She was afraid of what they might find, but she knew there was no turning back. She needed to know. She needed to understand. Let's go. They took Lucas's car and drove to the indicated address. It was an old but well-maintained building, surrounded by gardens. They rang the apartment intercom, but no one answered. They tried talking to the doorman, who informed them that the apartment had been empty for years, belonging to a family that rarely appeared. Lucas didn't give up. He used his contacts and managed to discover the owner's name through public records, and when he saw the name, his blood ran cold. The apartment belonged to a subsidiary of Carvalho Investimentos, a shell company his father used for discreet transactions. Julia, this place belongs to my family. My father owns this apartment. Julia felt her legs weaken. Everything was connected. Everything led back to the Carvalho family. We need to get in there, she said, her voice firm despite the fear. Lucas thought for a moment and then made a decision. He knew the building's manager through business connections. He made a call, invented an excuse about the need for an inspection, and an hour later, they were inside the apartment. The place was clean but clearly uninhabited. Furniture covered in white sheets, closed curtains, a smell of mold in the air. Lucas and Julia began to search. Drawers, cabinets, shelves. Most were empty. Until Julia opened a built-in closet in the bedroom and found a wooden box at the top. Lucas helped bring the box down. It was locked, but the lock was simple. He forced it with a screwdriver he found in the kitchen. When they opened it, they were paralyzed. Inside were documents, many documents, certificates, contracts, old photographs, and in the middle of it all, an envelope with the name Clarice Carvalho. Lucas took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a handwritten letter, dated 28 years ago. Eduardo, I can't stand living with this lie anymore. Our daughter is alive and you know it. I know you did what you thought was necessary to protect us from the people you got involved with, but this isn't right. She deserves to be with us. She deserves to know who she is. Every day I look at the empty crib and cry. Every day I think of her, where she is, if she is okay, if she misses me. You say it's better this way, that it's safer, that one day we can bring her back. But when, Eduardo? When are we going to stop being afraid? I no longer recognize the man I married. You have become someone cold, someone who chose business over your own family, and I don't know if I can keep living like this. Clarice. Lucas felt the tears fall. His mother, his biological mother, had written that. She had suffered from the separation of a daughter he never knew existed. A daughter who was now sitting beside him, reading the same letter, discovering she had a mother who had loved her and sought her. Julia looked at Lucas, her eyes overflowing. I am your sister. The words hung in the air, heavy and transformative. Lucas stared at her, seeing for the first time not just a woman he was helping, but the sister who had been stolen from him, the family he never knew he had. He pulled her into a tight hug, and the two cried together. They cried for the loss, for the injustice, for the stolen time, but they also cried with relief, because finally the truth was coming to light. Finally, the pieces fit. When they separated, Lucas looked around the apartment. My father hid you here. This was the safe place, and then he handed you over to Donna Maria. All of this to protect you from something, or someone. Julia wiped her tears. But from whom, from what? Lucas took more documents from the box. There were old contracts, debt agreements, names of companies he didn't recognize. And then he found something that made everything make sense. It was a partnership contract between Eduardo Carvalho and a group of investors dated 29 years ago. The value was astronomical for the time, and the clauses were terrifying. There were mentions of personal guarantees, family commitments, and severe penalties in case of non-compliance. Lucas read aloud to Julia. The contractor commits to providing personal guarantees, including but not limited to properties, shares, and direct family ties, which may be used as a form of pressure in case of default or breach of agreement. Julia felt nauseous. They used you as a guarantee. You were the pressure, the way to keep my father under control. Lucas nodded, anger growing inside him. And when he tried to pull away, when he wanted to leave this agreement, they threatened you. So he hid you. He sent you away. He sacrificed his own family to keep you safe. It was a devastating revelation. Eduardo was not just a father who had abandoned his daughter. He was a man who had made terrible choices, but perhaps with the intention to protect. A man who had lived for decades carrying guilt, fear, and the secret of having a living daughter somewhere hidden from the world. We need to confront him, Julia said. He needs to tell everything, every detail. Lucas agreed, but he knew that would destroy the family. It would destroy Eduardo's image, and perhaps it would destroy what remained of any bond between father and son. Even so, it was necessary. Truth always is. They left the apartment carrying all the documents. The journey was far from over, but now they had proof, they had the truth, and they were ready to demand answers. The confrontation with Eduardo Carvalho was near, and when it happened, nothing would ever be the same again. Lucas arranged a meeting with his father on a Sunday afternoon. He said they needed to talk about something important related to business. Eduardo, suspecting nothing, agreed to receive him at home. Patricia was traveling to a charity event in Campinas, so they would have privacy. Julia waited outside in the car. They had decided that Lucas would first speak with his father alone, set the stage, and only then would she enter. It was a strategy, but it was also a way to give Eduardo the chance to tell the truth before being directly confronted by the daughter he had abandoned. Lucas entered the house where he had grown up. It was an imposing mansion in the Morumbi neighborhood, with well-kept gardens, a pool, and a privileged view of the city. Everything there breathed wealth and success. But now, knowing the truth, it all seemed built on sand, on lies and sacrifices that should never have been made. Eduardo received him in his private office, an environment that had always intimidated Lucas as a child. Shelves filled with books, trophies, and certificates on the walls, a solid mahogany desk. His father was in a dress shirt and tailored trousers, even though it was Sunday. Eduardo Carvalho never fully relaxed. "Sit down, Lucas. What is so urgent that it couldn't wait until Monday?" Lucas sat in the armchair in front of the desk, but he didn't relax. His muscles were tense, his heart beating fast. He placed a folder of documents on the desk. "I found some interesting things in the last few days, Father. Things you kept very well hidden." Eduardo frowned, but he didn't seem alarmed yet. "What are you talking about?" Lucas opened the folder and began taking out documents, placing them one by one on the desk. The old medical report, the contracts with dangerous investors, Clarice's letter, every paper that fell onto the mahogany was like a bomb exploding. Eduardo's face lost its color. His eyes widened. His hands began to tremble. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice coming out hoarse. "In the apartment in Jardins, the one you used to hide the truth, to hide her." Eduardo stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You had no right to touch that. You had no right to invade my privacy." "Privacy?" Lucas also stood up, his voice rising. "You call this privacy? You hid a daughter, Father, a child. You took her away from her own mother, handed her over to a stranger to raise, and let her believe she was an orphan her whole life." Eduardo passed his hand over his face, his whole body shaking. He took a few steps back and leaned against the bookshelf, as if his legs could no longer support him. "You don't understand, you can't understand, you weren't there, you don't know how it was." "Then explain it to me," Lucas shouted. "Tell me what happened, why did you do this?" Eduardo closed his eyes. The defenses he had built for decades were crumbling. There was no longer any way to flee, no longer any way to lie. His son knew. And for the first time in years, Eduardo felt an immense weight lift from his shoulders, even knowing the truth would destroy him. He sat heavily in the armchair behind the desk and began to speak, his voice tired and loaded with regret. "I was 28 years old when I started the company. I was young, ambitious, full of dreams. But I had no money, I had no connections. I had nothing but an idea and a lot of will to win. Your mother, Clarice, was pregnant with you. We needed a better life. We needed security." He paused, his hands trembling on the table. "That was when I met the investors. They offered me everything I needed. Money, contacts, open doors, but they demanded guarantees. I thought it was just about properties, about shares. I signed without reading everything, without fully understanding what I was doing." Lucas listened in silence, his fists clenched. "In the first years, everything went well. The company grew, the money came in, you were born. And then a year later, Clarice got pregnant again. We had a girl, beautiful, perfect. She had her mother's eyes, the sweetest smile I've ever seen." Eduardo wiped away the tears that began to fall. "But that was when everything crumbled. I wanted to leave the agreement with the investors. I realized they were dangerous people involved in dark business. I tried to break the contract, and that was when they reminded me of the guarantees I had signed. They weren't just financial, they were personal. They could use my family against me, and they made it clear they would do so if I didn't cooperate." Lucas felt nauseous. "They threatened your sister. They said they would take her, that they would use her to force me to keep doing what they wanted." I panicked. Clarice was desperate. We didn't know what to do. And then someone suggested a way out. If the child disappeared, if she were kept in safety far from me, far from the company, they would have no way to use her as pressure. "So you hid your own daughter," Lucas said, his voice loaded with contempt. "I saved her," Eduardo shouted back. "I protected her. If she stayed with me, they would have taken her. They would have used her in ways I can't even imagine. I had no choice." "There is always a choice, Father. You could have gone to the police, you could have fought." Eduardo shook his head, defeated. They were too powerful. They had connections everywhere, in the police, in the justice system, everywhere. If I tried to report them, I would die. Clarice would die. You would die. And even then, they would take the girl. "And Donna Maria, Julia grew up with her. How did that happen?" Eduardo took a deep breath. "We needed someone trustworthy, someone outside our circle. A social worker who worked with us knew Donna Maria, a woman without a family who desperately wanted to have a daughter. She agreed to take care of the girl temporarily. I said it would be for a short time until things calmed down, but years passed, the investors kept watching me, and I realized I could never bring her back. She was safer where she was." And the necklace? Eduardo smiled sadly. It was my mother's, a family heirloom. I put it on the girl's neck before handing her over to Donna Maria. I wanted her to have something that linked her to us, something that proved she was a Carvalho, even if she could never use that name. Lucas felt anger and pity at the same time. His father was a broken man, living for decades with a guilt that consumed him from the inside. And Clarice, how did she deal with that? Eduardo closed his eyes, the pain evident on his face. She never recovered. She tried to be strong, tried to move on, but the loss destroyed her from within. She got sick, depressed, and 3 years later, her heart couldn't take it. The doctors said it was a cardiac complication. But I know the truth. It was a broken heart. She gave up on living because she couldn't live without her daughter. Lucas felt tears fall. His mother, the woman he barely remembered, she had died of sadness for a daughter who had been torn from her. And you never tried to get her back. You never thought of bringing Julia back. Every day, Eduardo whispered. Every damn day I thought about it. But I was afraid that the investors would find out where she was, afraid that going back would put her in danger. So I let it be. I let her grow up far from me. I let her believe she was an orphan. And I lived with this guilt eating me alive. Lucas took a deep breath. It was time. She is here, father, outside, waiting. Eduardo's eyes widened. What? Julia, your daughter. The woman you humiliated and fired at that party. She is here, and she deserves to hear all of this from you. Eduardo stood up staggeringly, his face pale. No, I can't. I can't look at her after what I did. But you're going to have to look, Lucas said firm, because she has the right to know. She has the right to hear the truth from your mouth. Lucas left the office and went to get Julia. She was sitting in the car, nervous, her hands clenched in her lap. When Lucas opened the door, she looked at him with eyes full of expectation and fear. He told everything. He's waiting for you. Julia got out of the car and walked to the house with trembling legs. Each step brought her closer to the man who was her biological father, the man who had hidden her, the man who had chosen to protect her, but also to abandon her. She entered the office and saw Eduardo standing near the window, his back turned to her. When he turned and their eyes met, time seemed to stop. Eduardo saw in her traces of Clarice, the same eyes, the same way of tilting her head. And he also saw himself, the determination, the strength. She was his daughter. There was no doubt. Julia, he whispered, his voice broken. She said nothing. She just stared at him, waiting for him to take responsibility for everything he had done. I am so sorry, Eduardo said, tears rolling freely down his face. I'm sorry for everything, for abandoning you, for hiding you, for letting you grow up without knowing who you were. I made terrible choices, choices that haunt me every day. But know that I did it out of love. I did it to protect you. Julia felt tears burn, but she forced herself to speak. You stole a life from me. You stole from me the chance to know my mother. You stole a family from me. And when we finally met, you humiliated me. You accused me. You threw me away, as if I were nothing. Eduardo shook his head, desperate. I panicked when I saw the necklace. I realized who you were, and I was afraid. Afraid that your presence there would bring back everything I tried to forget. Afraid that the investors would find out. Afraid of losing you again. Julia took a step forward, her voice firm despite the tears. You never had me to lose. You abandoned me, and now you need to live with that. Eduardo fell to his knees, sobbing. He was a powerful man, feared in the business world, now completely destroyed by the truth he had kept for so long. Julia looked at him, feeling a mix of anger, pity, and something else. Something she couldn't name. Perhaps it was the possibility of forgiveness. Perhaps it was just the understanding that everyone there was a victim of impossible choices. I need time, she said. I need to process all of this. But know that despite everything, I survived, I grew up, and I became someone strong. And that I do not owe to you. She turned and left the office, leaving Eduardo shattered. Lucas followed her, and together they left that house carrying the weight of the newly discovered truth. The revelation had happened, but the story was not yet complete, because the investors who threatened Eduardo decades ago still existed, and when they discovered that Julia was back, that the secret had been revealed, nothing would stop them from trying to regain the control they thought they had over the Carvalho family. The storm was just beginning. The days that followed the confrontation were tense and transformative. Julia returned to her apartment, carrying the weight of the newly discovered truth. She was no longer just Julia, the cleaning lady humiliated at a rich people's party. She was Julia Carvalho, the hidden daughter of a millionaire businessman, Lucas's sister, Clarice's granddaughter. She had an identity, she had a story. But she also had a huge hole in her chest, made of lost years, of a mother she never knew, and of a father who had chosen to protect her through abandonment. Lucas visited her every day. They spent hours talking, reconstructing the family history, filling in the gaps that decades of silence had created. He showed her old photos of Clarice, told stories he had heard from Donna Teresa, shared fragmented memories of the mother he had lost so early, and gradually, Julia began to understand that she was no longer alone. She had a brother, someone who saw her, who valued her, who would fight by her side. But peace would not last long. On a Wednesday afternoon, Lucas received an anonymous phone call on his cell phone. The voice on the other end was cold, calculating, threatening. "We know the girl is back. We know the truth has been revealed. This cannot stay like this. Eduardo Carvalho made an agreement with us decades ago, and agreements are not broken." Lucas felt his blood run cold. "Who are you? What do you want?" "It doesn't matter who we are. What matters is what we can do. Your father owes us. And now that the guarantee has reappeared, we can collect." The call dropped. Lucas immediately called his father, who confirmed his worst fears. The investors had found out, they were watching, and they would not accept losing the control they thought they had over the Carvalho family. Eduardo, for the first time in decades, decided to face the fear. He could no longer live running away. He could no longer sacrifice the daughter he had just found again. He gathered Lucas and Julia at the mansion and proposed a plan. They would go together to the authorities, hand over all the documents that proved the threats and illegal agreements, and expose the investors publicly. It was risky. It could destroy Eduardo's reputation, but it was the only way to ensure that Julia would truly be safe. Julia looked at her father. She still felt anger, she still felt pain, but she also saw a broken man trying to fix what he had broken, and perhaps that deserved a chance. "I'm going with you," she said, "but on one condition. I want you to publicly assume that I am your daughter. I want the world to know. I want my name back." Eduardo agreed without hesitation. It was the least he could do. The following week, the Carvalhos went to the federal police, accompanied by lawyers and armed with all the evidence. The documents revealed a corruption scheme that involved not only investors, but also politicians, businessmen, and influential figures. The investigation was opened, the authorities acted quickly, and in a few days, several involved were held accountable. The story leaked to the press. Newspapers splashed headlines about the scandal. Eduardo Carvalho, the respected businessman, had hidden a daughter for decades to protect her from criminal investors. Public opinion was divided. Some called him a coward, others a protective father. But what mattered was that the truth was exposed, and with it, Julia could finally walk with her head held high. Patricia, who had returned from her trip in the middle of it all, was shocked. She had accused Julia of theft, without knowing she was facing the stepdaughter she had never met. Guilt consumed her. She sought Julia out personally, apologized with tears in her eyes, offered everything she could to compensate for the public humiliation. Julia listened to her, felt the sincerity in her regret, and accepted the apology. It wasn't easy to forgive, but Julia was tired of carrying anger. Eduardo, for his part, took concrete steps to redeem himself. He legally recognized Julia as his daughter, included her name in all family documents, and ensured she would have access to everything that should always have been hers. But more important than that, he started to be present. He visited her, talked, tried to truly get to know her, and gradually something was rebuilt between them. It wasn't what it could have been. It never would be. But it was real. It was true. And it was a beginning. Lucas and Julia, in turn, became inseparable. The connection between them went beyond the blood tie. They shared the pain of having grown up without knowing about each other. They shared the strength they found to fight for the truth. And they also shared something new that bloomed between them. It wasn't just fraternal love, it was deep friendship, complicity, partnership. Julia discovered she had an incredible brother, and Lucas discovered he had a warrior sister. On a Sunday afternoon, 3 months after the public revelation, the family gathered at the Carvalho mansion. Eduardo, Patricia, Lucas, and Julia sat together in the garden under the shade of an old tree. There were still silences. There were wounds that would not fully heal, but there was also hope. Julia touched the necklace that still hung on her neck, the same sapphire, the same gold. But now it was no longer just a vague memory of an obscure past. It was proof that she had always belonged to that family. She had always been loved, even from afar. She had always been a Carvalho. "Father," she said, using the word for the first time, "tell me about my mother, about Clarice. I want to know everything." Eduardo smiled through his tears, and he began to speak. He spoke about the woman he had loved, about the dreams they had together, about the joy he felt when Julia was born, and about the pain he carried when he had to hand her over to Donna Maria. Julia listened to everything, absorbing every word, reconstructing the image of a mother she never knew, but who had loved her deeply. And she felt gratitude. Gratitude for Donna Maria, who had raised her with all the love in the world. Gratitude for Lucas, who had found her when she needed it most. And gratitude even for Eduardo, who had made terrible choices, but always motivated by the intention to protect. At the end of the afternoon, when the sun began to set, tinting the sky orange and pink, Julia stood up and looked at everyone gathered there. Her family, imperfect, broken, but hers. "I lost many years," she said. "I lost my mother. I lost my childhood with you, but I gained something too. I gained strength. I gained identity. And now I gain you." Lucas hugged her. Eduardo cried. Patricia smiled. And there in that garden, a family that had been torn apart by fear and lies began to rebuild itself on the foundation of truth. Julia returned to her apartment that night with a lighter heart than it had been in years. She looked around that small but cozy space and thought about everything that had changed. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer alone. She was no longer the cleaning lady humiliated at a rich people's party. She was Julia Carvalho, and no one could take that away from her again. In the following weeks, she made important decisions. She decided to go back to school studying business administration so she could perhaps one day work alongside Lucas in the family business. She also decided to keep her apartment, her own space, because she didn't want to depend on anyone. The Carvalho wealth now belonged to her legally, but she insisted on building her own path. Eduardo, seeing his daughter's determination, felt pride. She was strong, resilient. She had survived everything life had thrown at her and come out the other side stronger. And he knew that, despite all the mistakes he had made, Julia would become an extraordinary woman, because she already was. Lucas, for his part, found in Julia not just a sister but an inspiration. She had taught him that family is not just blood or a surname. It is a choice. It is a fight. It is being present even when everything seems lost. And he promised himself that he would never again let secrets and lies destroy what they had rebuilt together. Patricia, still carrying the guilt of the public accusation, made a point of redeeming herself in every possible way. She became an ally to Julia, offering support, advice, and even friendship. It wasn't easy for either of them, but both were willing to try. And so the story that had begun with an unjust accusation, a cruel dismissal, and a public humiliation ended with redemption, truth, and reconstruction. The necklace that had been seen as proof of theft revealed itself to be what it always was: proof of belonging. Proof that Julia had never been a stranger. She had never been a threat. She had always been part of that family, even when no one knew. Months later, on a starry night, Julia was on the balcony of her apartment when she received a call from Lucas. "Hey sis, you okay?" She smiled. She still got emotional every time he called her that. "I'm great, and you?" "Me too. I just wanted to know if you're coming to Sunday dinner at Dad's house. He's making a point of you being there." Julia thought for a moment. There were still difficult days. There were still moments when anger returned, when pain made itself present. But there were also good days. Days when the family gathered, laughed together, rebuilt bonds. And those days were worth it. I am. You can count on me. Great, I'll pick you up. Lucas? Yes? Thank you for everything, for having believed in me when no one else did, for having fought by my side, for being the best brother I could have. On the other side of the line, Lucas felt emotion tighten his throat. No need to thank me, Julia. You're my sister, and I'll always be here for you, always. They hung up, but the warmth of that conversation stayed with Julia for a long time. She looked at the necklace on her neck, now no longer just a mysterious relic, but a symbol of everything she had gone through and everything she had achieved. The journey had not been easy. It had been painful, full of difficult revelations and confrontations that broke her inside. But it had also been necessary, because without the truth, she would never be free. She would never be complete. And now, finally, she was. Julia Carvalho, daughter of Eduardo and Clarice, sister of Lucas, strong, determined woman, a survivor, and above all, owner of her own story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Julia, Lucas, and Eduardo has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of truth, forgiveness, and reconstruction, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it Julia's humiliation at the party, the confrontation between Lucas and Eduardo, or the final revelation about the necklace? Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul.